أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم من همزه ونفخه ونفثه بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسولنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Last time we didn't have a session. I had another thing going on that time, and so I had to cancel. So today is the first session coming back, and I'm gonna have to build this habit from scratch, essentially, meaning that I'm gonna say that this is my first attempt at it. This is the way I'm gonna navigate this, so that I can maintain the habit, or make sure it solidifies. Because when you break a habit one time, the second time is a lot easier, and so on. Now, there's another way to look at this that you could also look at it that way, and I am, having this in my mind, and that is that in terms of expectations, things like this could happen, and so I just need to expect that, as part of the habit. I'm not considering that as a break of habit. I'm just considering that as something came up that I didn't have necessarily could manage otherwise. So in this particular context, I can come up with a strategy to make sure that those external influences don't impact this situation again. But that's the same thing as me saying this is the first habit. I'm treating it as my first attempt at building a habit. I'm starting from scratch because I'm still going to be doing the same thing of making sure that those external influences are limited or minimized or accounted for in terms of the habit. So it's the same thing. I'm just looking at it in just framing it a different way. So it's the same reality, but both framings are okay, depending on what you feel is going to be more effective in your particular context. Okay, so with that, how have things been, and how are you guys planning your goals? What have you found that is effective? What is not effective? What is overwhelming you, but you're finding yourself able to address it, something that you have control over, versus something that you don't have control over? And how are you managing the latter of those two? So we are on this breaking down big things, the A to B journey into checkpoints or mile markers or whatever you want to call them. We're breaking them into some sort of general goals, essentially, that you're trying to go towards. The next step after that is to make sure that we focus on. So the step number 4 would be focusing on the smaller steps that you would take towards each checkpoint, each mile marker, right? And how to make sure that you're actually um, moving forward. How are you doing those things that are those small little steps that you might be taking to reach that milestone? So we're just chunking it, but how do we actually, within each chunk, how do we actually get from the beginning of that chunk to the end of that chunk, right? So those are the daily things, or those are little things here and there that to keep in mind and stuff, right? The traps that a person might fall into, and how to make sure that fall into those traps. How to make sure that you're motivated to continue towards a certain step, towards um, getting from one point in the chunk to the next point and so on. And they were talking about very small increments over here. So that's what that is. And overall, just kind of looking at the general vision and some other things to make sure that you constantly stay motivated. So this is let's say that if we were taking the alphabet from A to Z, right? If you're saying if your chunks are B, C, D, E, F, G all the way down, right? Then we're talking about going from A to B. What is that looking like and stuff? And then what is from B to C? What is from C to D and so on? How do we make sure we're doing that? But also looking at how we're actually making progress. So looking at the bigger picture as well. So focusing on the tree, but also looking at the forest itself. And that's what step 4 is going to be more, inshallah. There's a few slides over here that I'm using to review. But review here is just to really implant it in your mind so it becomes second nature to you. That's it. That's the reason I keep emphasizing this and keep presenting it over and over again, just so that it gets implanted in your mind, inshallah. It should be so that I say amp, you know what that means. If I say motivation, you know what that means. If I say discipline, you know what that means and stuff. That the memories are triggered, essentially. And also common roadblocks. So as you're taking those incremental steps in step 4 up here, right? Or if you're in step 3, some things to keep in mind would be those roadblocks and stuff. So you can always have that in the back of your mind. So if you start seeing those things, you can catch them immediately in the very beginning and then address them before they become really big issues and so on. And always keep in mind, where is your worldview coming? Where is your what is your source of information, essentially? If you think that something is going to happen a certain way, go back and say, is that something that I've assumed? Is that something that is valid in all cases? Is that something that's valid only in some cases? How does this work, right? And is this going to be valid in the particular context that I'm looking at, right? Or do I need to reevaluate this context and disconnect it from all the other experiences that I've had, in the sense that it's not identical to everything else, right? And what might have changed? Can a particular rule that I was thinking about be applied in this particular context, or is that only applicable in other contexts, for example? Or maybe a part of it might be applicable in this context, but I need to go back and evaluate originally with the original supposition or whatever the original rule was, and see how I need to customize it for this particular context. So kind of evaluating how you might be perceiving a particular context. And remembering these things, the difference between an optimist and a pessimist, in the categories of permanence, pervasiveness, or in the aspects of permanence, pervasiveness, personalization, and hope. Just keep these things in mind so that you have an idea of what your default looks like. If your default doesn't match with the optimist, then sort of adjust yourself accordingly. If your default is looking like the pessimist, then which area is it that you need to address? Maybe it's looking like that in permanence. Maybe it's looking that on pervasiveness. Maybe it's looking like that in personalization. Whatever that is, just keep that in mind. And again, in the aspect of personalization, it doesn't mean that you're being arrogant and stuff. It's just sort of sorting things out so that you understand what you have control over, what you don't have control over, and accounting for those things. And hope, obviously, being hopeful and looking forward to things. And we differentiate, when we talked about hope, we differentiate between expectations and hope. You can expect a certain thing that's realistic, but you can always hope for more than that. Now, you're going to be planning based on your expectations, but you're hoping for something better than that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't control everything, right? And we say, we say, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with him is all the khair, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is over everything able. So the thing that we need to understand over here is that hope is different than expectations. Expectations are what you're thinking that things are going to go by, and you have a plan in place for that. Now you hope things are going to be better than that, and that's okay. You can hope for that. But if things don't go based on your hope, they go based on your expectations, well, your plan was actually in place for your expectations, right? And so you're not bothered by that. But if things happen that that you were hoping for, and that was beyond your expectations, then that's amazing. Another boost of motivation, and that's great. Some things to keep in mind over here, just summaries. Just have like a picture of this, and again, anytime you remember anything else that you want to add on to this, we'll look at that inshallah. Okay, and we mentioned some of these strategies here. So remember, psychological dispositions might be, for example, how you're feeling, what you're, maybe you had a bad day, for example, maybe you had a good day, how that can impact moving forward. So you want to make sure that you have positive psychological dispositions that are going to actually help you move forward. And if there's anything that's negative in your mind, that's holding you back, any experience that you had, anything that overwhelmed you or something like that hasn't been resolved, go ahead and try to resolve that first, right? And if it's something that you have another matter that you need to address that's more urgent, and you're not able to, like, you have a plan in place and you need to address that, but then just understand that your framing, or so your handling of that particular project may get impacted because of this psychological disposition from like how your day went, how something went before this project that was like that you didn't like, and so how that could impact your project itself. So if you have that expectation going in, then if you feel like, okay, well, maybe I'm overreacting because of that previous experience earlier today and stuff, and maybe I don't need to think about this, or maybe I can allocate decision making to somebody else for this time period, because I might be like not able to handle the situation and the way that I would otherwise handle and stuff. So making sure that you're just aware of these things and how they can impact your progress towards particular goals or execution of certain projects and so on. With a sense of urgency, this is where if I don't do this, this is going to happen. It's going to keep you accountable. Essentially, it's a way of motivating you to actually get things done. So you're not getting lazy, you're not becoming lax, and the habits are actually instilled there instead of not being instilled. Okay, and these are some case studies that we could do. I think we did health organization, we did an example of that, but what I had over here is also beyond that, like why was it even formed in the first place, and what was it trying to achieve, and so on. So that was something. This is a part of like a larger global strategy over here. So if there's anything from this that you want to go over, we can do that. Otherwise, we went over this particular one last time. If there's anything that you feel like we didn't cover, or we could have covered, we should have covered, you can mention that here. So this is what we were at last time, and this. Breaking it down. So we did the first 3 steps. We did a first, I guess 4 steps. Reality check. Is it realistic to acquire Islamic knowledge? And we also have to figure out what is it that, we're, like, what are some ways that we're thinking of that's possible that we're actually going to be considering as part of our vision. So here, is the vision realistic or not? Are the steps that we're taking, where we're at currently, is the vision something that's achievable? Where we're at currently, is it something that we are doing in, like, in terms of honesty and being authentic about it, or are we hiding things and stuff? And then looking at breaking it down realistically, what can we maintain, or what can we actually do that is in our control, that is actually also feasible, and then we can get through from point A to point B. If there's anything that you wanted to add to this, we can add that, inshallah. Otherwise, we will go to our case study today, inshallah. So this was what you guys wanted to do, so we went over it in front of you. So I want to just give you examples of how we can do that, so you can see it live happening, and you can see, like, the thought processes that go along with that. So you can apply the same strategies in your own goals and things like that, inshallah. Okay. So here's the last thing over here for today. I'm gonna add this, and that's it. So once we go over this, we're done. So if you have anything in specific in mind that you want to go over, whether it's from that list above, or it's something that you guys have separately, we can go over that. Otherwise, I'll give you one example of, like in one of my cases, how I've navigated that.
Something that came to mind is someone I know. He recently got in a divorce, and he's young, and the marriage didn't last very long. And I don't have like a lot of details about it or anything, but like it came down to them being on different pages with regards to the deen. Like I don't know if this is like this is usable for this, but like it just made me like worried about like for myself if I was to get into a marriage. And it turned out, like, as we got to know each other like on a deeper level, I realized that like she might not be the best for me with regards to my deen, and like what are ways to get around that if possible.
Okay. This is actually a concern that a lot of people have. A lot of youth have the same concern, males and females both. And this is a good one. So we can go over this if you want, inshallah. So we want to have, first of all, we want to have a topic for this, so we have a little bit more of a focus on what we're talking about here. So are you talking about picking a spouse? Or are you talking about like not picking a spouse, but like actually starting a marriage in a particular procedural format?
I don't know. I guess it's a combination of two, because I wouldn't want to be in that situation to begin with. So, like picking a spouse is important, but then also, like, sometimes it doesn't work out that way. Sometimes you pick someone and then you get married, and then later on you realize. So, like, I don't know, which one do you think is more effective, picking or what to do after you're in it? And like, I'm not sure.
Both are important. I know some people that are looking for people to get married to right now, and I'm kind of helping them a little bit. I also know people that were in a marriage, and now they are, they're thinking of divorce, for example, and I'm trying to, first try to see if this is a reconcilable marriage, as in we can reconcile. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran, that reconciliation is better. And he also mentions about two parties, if they both intend good in yurida islahan, like if they both want reconciliation, يوفق الله بينهم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to facilitate the matter between them, and it's going to make sure that that they get together, and so on. Now, this is something that you would focus on first. So I'm really firm on this, that if two people want to reconcile, they sincerely want to reconcile, it is possible. And Allah, knowing the objectives of marriage, why people get married, why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or what are the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put in terms of expectations from both sides, right? If we want to go with that, even if you go by the middle or the minimum, right? But it is possible for people to be married and continue being married, because most people, if not every single couple, has ups and downs, right? But there are some things that if you don't know how to manage those ups and downs, if you haven't gotten some training or strategy and stuff like that, then things can get really bad. But I'm a firm believer that if two people intend reconciliation, then it can happen. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned that sulh is better, and my belief on this is that Allah Azza wa Jalla is not gonna say something is better unless it was a possibility to begin with. Something cannot be better than something else if that thing that's better wasn't a possibility to begin with. So, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is also saying that if both parties intend good, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is gonna give them success in this matter. So I believe that. So it's more of a matter of, okay, what are those expectations that we should have from our spouses, and what are some things that a spouse should have about themselves? What are some things that they can do? What are some things that they can do in terms of learning strategies, in terms of getting some training and so on, to be able to move forward? Now, a lot of the stuff that I'm giving over here in the past few months has been focused on making sure people are able to manage their circumstances a lot better, that we are framing things differently compared to what we've grown up or what we come to understand as, or come to believe. I'm not going to say understand, come to believe is reality, right? The strategies that I give, the strategies that I focus on, the strategies that actually non-Muslims are giving in their sessions nowadays, they're actually things that people both sides can look at them, they would actually be able to use them in a way towards good, and towards reconciliation and towards optimization of relationships and so on. So that's one of the reasons I'm actually having these workshops as well, because I intend on trying to give those, inshallah. So that's that. So again, there's a process you can follow in terms of choosing a spouse, and if you have the right strategies in mind, the right perspectives in mind, the right expectations, right? If you're realistic about what in terms of capital T truth, if you're realistic, then you're going to be able to account for those things in a realistic way, and you're going to be able to sustain your relationships within that, and that's it. So it's just a matter of knowing the right steps, essentially, and and doing things the right way, essentially. That's it. There's this thing that people think that it's just a matter of compatibility, and that's it, but it's not as simple as that. In fact, there's a lot of stories from so for example, if you look at non-Muslim statistics, right, from people that are actually doing research in marriage counseling and marriage therapy and stuff like that, and the people that do research in terms of what are good relationships and so on, they will tell you that there are certain things that are effective in terms of making sure that things actually work out between two people, right? And that they actually have love grow between them and trust grow between them and so on. But it does take effort on both sides. It's not a one person doing it situation. So it's things are a lot simpler. And what I'm trying to say than we often make it seem like. We assume certain constants, but if we go back and actually question whether those constants or those assumptions are actually correct in every scenario, then we're not going to be able to justify that necessarily. But we assume that that's still, that these are still facts instead of assumptions. So just something to keep in mind. Just because people have certain experiences, they have certain anecdotes, and they have certain data points that have given them certain trend lines, it doesn't necessitate that reality looks exactly like that. I hope that makes sense. If you want, we could start off with picking a spouse, right? And then later on, we can go into then focus on optimizing relationships. So that is something that we could do if we want to do, if you want, inshallah. Or we can focus on optimizing relationships if you're not as worried about picking a spouse. If you're worried, you mentioned about divorce, where there are certain strategies that they could have used. Like what are some things that generally can help resolve conflict between people right before they got divorced? What method, what means did they use to sort of facilitate the conversations and so on? What are some priorities that they focused on? What are the things that were really the fundamental root issues as opposed to surface issues, right? And what was being addressed? If they approached somebody, for example, for help, did that person just focus on surface issues, or were they also trying to address the underlying issues and stuff, right? And how were both parties trying to manage things and stuff, right? So these are some things to just keep in mind over here. And being in two different scales religiously doesn't necessarily, now there are trends, there are things that just happen to happen, right? It doesn't mean that this is how it should happen, right? Like that's the only way it can happen. It just means that things happen this way, and there are reasons for that we can get into. But being on a different level Islamically doesn't necessarily mean that your marriage is not going to work out. And here's some examples, right? The ulama, when they get married to people, it's not always the case that their spouses are equal to them. Okay? It's not always the case that their spouses are equal to them in terms of Islamic knowledge and stuff like that. But they've learned certain strategies in terms of addressing that. If I have something that another person doesn't have, how do I interact with that person? Do I make them feel like they are not good enough, or do I expect from them what they are not able to deliver, essentially, right? How does that happen? The Prophet said when he was giving da'wah, for example, at the end of the day, what did that look like? By the way, I'm talking about reality. So what does reality look like? So we have expectations here. That's the discussion we're having right now. The Prophet ﷺ, for example, when he married his wives, right, at the end of the day, did they really know as much as he did? Were they equal to him in terms of Islamic knowledge and understanding and so on? It does, by no means are we putting down the mothers of our mothers, the mothers of the believers, right? Right? We're not putting them down by any means, right? They're actually the best of women, and that's it. We know that, right? But what we're saying over here, were they equal to the Prophet ﷺ in terms of connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and so on and so on, right? That's the question I'm asking over here. And if the answer is no to that question, then that means we have to ask the next question. Okay, well, how did he actually manage working with them? So here's where you say, okay, well, what does it mean for a person to have Islamic understanding and knowledge in terms of how they interact with other people and stuff, right? And how is that going to facilitate their, how is that going to help in terms of optimizing the relationship between two different people? Because ultimately you are two different people, whether you like it or not. Even like identical twins, if they're sitting in one place, let's say they're sitting in the corner of a room, same everything, they're just sitting in the corner, they're wearing the same clothes, they have the same hairstyle, they have the same everything, right? But the very fact that one of them is sitting on the left of the other one by itself, but just that right there is a different experience than the other one is having, because the other one is to the right of the other person. That's it, just because of that. So by default, even that one little experience can have a huge impact in terms of how the brain takes that and moves on and moves forward and stuff, right? But obviously there's more to that. There's a lot more, there are a lot more differences than just that difference in a typical life of a person, right? In a typical life of identical twins and so on. So there are different experiences. So there's no person that's exactly the same as you. So by default, everyone is different. So whether it's in deen, whether it's in education, whether it's in background and history or something like that, whatever it might be, you have different experiences. You guys are two different people. So it's not a matter of trying to keep things constant. It's about managing whatever is not constant, whatever is not the same. Not constant, but the same, I mean. So this is what reality looks like. That you're not going to find two people that are identical. And just the fact that a husband and wife are by definition, here, male and female, just that in itself means that there are two different people. Different experiences, different ideas, different thoughts and stuff like that. They're not going to agree on everything 100%. So this is the reality. Trying to put things to the constant, like saying like this is the same as this other person, so making that as like something like a controlled variable. That happens in laboratory situations, but it's not something that's in real life. Something that you are going to find in relationships and so on. And I gave an example, even identical twins, the fact that one of them is sitting, to the left of the other person and so on, by itself is one clear example of that even identical twins will have the same experiences. Okay, so with this reality, I'm a little bit hesitant asking you what your criteria is, so I'm going to ask you instead, what are some things that people, right, might consider looking for in marriage, in a spouse? Let's say let's say you're talking, and what are some things that you feel guys generally that you know of, or that you've heard of, or that you've read about, and like people encouraging you to look for certain things and stuff, right? So in your experiences, right, what are generally some of the things that guys look for in a female? But if you want to talk about you specifically, we can talk about it off the recording. I just want to make sure that what's on here is like a little bit more general, so you don't get, we're not talking about you over here.
Yeah, I mean, just generally, obviously, guys look at beauty, and they look at their character. Like if there's someone that's nice to be around, and someone that dresses well, like modestly and stuff. And the same with their personality, like a modest personality. Um, I guess a good family, a good upbringing. Um, I guess educated, but I mean, some people prefer like different levels. Some people like see a lot of benefit in someone like who has like graduate school education, like is a doctor or something. Then some people prefer like just the bachelor's degree, or some people don't really care for college at all. Uh, I guess some people look, well, not even some, probably a lot look at like cultural relations, like if their two families would fit in well together. That's about all I could think of.
Okay, so let's talk about family upbringing, for example. What are some family, so in terms of culture, right? Um, I know that a lot of people tend to look for similar culture values and stuff, similar dynamics of like how families work and stuff like that, right? And they're trying to sort of control some variables essentially, right? Because and it makes sense for people to want to control certain things, so they're not thrown off track and stuff, or they're not overwhelmed or whatever. So they're trying to see if there's any similarities and stuff. So they have a point of connection, for example, a point where they don't have to actually learn new things and stuff, right? Now, I have my opinions on that. I think that we should always try to learn and grow and expand and so on. But I can definitely understand when people get overwhelmed because they might not be able to adapt as quickly, for example, or they might feel from the very beginning and they're not prepared to handle change and things like that. So I can see why they have worries about that. I would recommend people to learn strategies in terms of how to appreciate differences and actually navigate circumstances that are not under their control or that are different than what their norms are, right? I would encourage people to do that, but that doesn't mean that necessarily that they have to do that way. Is that right? My encouragement and my what I think doesn't necessitate that is something that is mandatory by Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. Okay, so Allah Subhanahu wa Taala allows you to have you look for certain things like this, like you have the same cultural values and so on, have similar family dynamics and so on. That's okay in Islam. So I'm just saying that in in terms of I would encourage them, because there is benefit in that, where you're able to expand and grow and connect with other people, and you know, when you work with different people, you get new experiences, and you have new perspectives and stuff. You're not closed-minded as much as you might otherwise tend to become, right? Again, when I say tend to become, it doesn't mean that everyone is like that, but there are generally, like, there are trends and stuff like that I'm addressing over here. Okay, so let's talk about family upbringing. What are you talking about by that? What kind of things that do people look for? Again, not about you, but what have you heard people looking for, and what are they saying not to do?
I just know, I guess I don't know if it's like a in my culture sort of thing, but like when they see that your parents are divorced or something, like okay, say you want to marry someone, and that person's family sees that your parents are divorced, they might have a bad impression on you.
Okay.
And I mean that that might be like has some truth to it, because people who grow up in a like a stronger family environment, like they know what like they have, you know, they have more positive experiences, they understand what a family is about and stuff, versus someone who grew up in a broken family. um so and they might be
Yeah,
used to like
totally.
dysfunction and stuff.
Yeah, and by broken, you mean specifically that there is a divorce in the family, right?
Yeah, divorce.
Yeah. And by the way, I'm using these words over here. Um, when you said, for example, broken, I know this is a word that's used, and I wanted to address that. And it doesn't mean that you intended anything bad, and it didn't mean that anything bad occurred to your mind, right? But the word that you were exposed to more was broken, because that's a general term that's used. Now, there are sensitivities around this word. So, for example, like I said, no divorce in parents and stuff, right? That was just to address the issue of, for example, how the word broken might come off to certain people, because it is a sensitive thing, right? So I just use that. But if somebody just, and I wanted to mention that a person who uses the word broken doesn't intend to say that this person is a bad family, or like, like evil or whatever and stuff. It just that's the word that is used typically in culture, and like in like that, like, just gatherings and interactions and stuff. So I just wanted to make that point over here, that there's no ill intent there, and it doesn't mean that people are failures and stuff like that. It just means that that's the word that people are more used to understanding the meaning of and stuff, and they know what that means. And then the dysfunctional over here, um, the word over here is in terms of like having, like, organization and kind of structured, and kind of, like, things are working well and operating well. Dysfunctional would be, for example, uh, everyone is like sort of disconnected, they're not bonded together, they're not working together, they're not cohesive family unit and stuff, right? And that's what and that doesn't necessarily have to be in families that are that don't have divorce, and um, or what people might call broken families and stuff, because even families that are together, they can be very dysfunctional as well. And I see that in many of my cases and stuff, that there are families that are, there's no divorce in the family. However, they tend to be very dysfunctional. What does that mean? Is that they are not able, like, the family dynamics are very um, family dynamics are very different, and family dynamics can have a negative impact, essentially, because maybe the parents are from a different culture, and they're trying to apply some of the same strategies that they were raised on when they're in a different culture with their kids now, right? So when the kids are in a different culture and the parents were from a different culture, there are certain things that can overlap, but there are also things that don't that need to be adjusted according to the new circumstance they find themselves in, right? According to new context and stuff. But parents may not know that. So this is, again, going back to some of the reasons why people prefer like the same culture, similar dynamics and stuff like that, because they tend to be more used to that, and so they don't have to do. There's no learning curve involved, essentially, right? And again, over here, this can also that mindset can sometimes lead to dysfunction in a family, when certain strategies that were applicable maybe in certain contexts are no longer applicable in a different context. And this goes back again some of the things that we mentioned earlier about how some things that you might have gotten used to may not apply in a different context, and so on. So you have to go back and question the assumptions that we were talking about earlier. Okay, and okay, continue.
about the family upbringing.
Yeah, you can talk about family, but you can talk about modesty and dress and manners and stuff.
I mean, modesty.
What do people talk about when this topic comes up? What is it that like generally you hear about in like halaqat or in lectures and khutbahs and like YouTube videos or whatever it is? What are some things that you typically hear when it comes to this context?
I mean, obviously, with like hijab, wearing it properly and understanding that it's not just a scarf on your head. It's like dressing in a way that's not like revealing of your body and stuff, not tight and stuff, not flashy and showing off everything. Um, and then with manners, like modesty and character goes in the same category to me. Um, I guess like a lot of girls, sometimes they show off a lot on social media and stuff, and um, like they take a lot of pictures of themselves and selfies and this and that.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of these things. These are some of the things like I hear many people do talk about. I know that like in a lot of the cases that that come up also, um, this is one of the concerns in terms of both spouses feeling sort of like secure with each other. So certain things do impact women a certain way, and there are some other things that impact men a certain way. So there are some similarities in terms of what both of them want, but there are also differences typically in terms of what they want from the other spouse, right? So a male, like the husband might want certain things that a wife may not give. For her it's not a big deal from her husband, like if she like in terms of what she wants from her husband, right? That's not one of the big things and stuff from her husband that she wants, but a husband wants some of these things and stuff like that. And then vice versa, there are certain things that a wife would really like prioritizes, but it's not some of the things that a husband would look for from his wife. So what I'm saying over here is there are differences in terms of what both of them would like from the other spouse and stuff, right? However, there are also similarities. There are some similarities in terms of what both want, and they're the same thing. So both want the same thing in certain cases, and both want some different things in certain cases and stuff. So there are some of those things, for example, are when it comes to, for example, like what's happening in terms of like for women. We're talking about men over here. That's why let me actually say over here, picking a wife, just so it's a little bit clearer here what we're talking about over here. And we can do another thing about picking a husband and stuff like that, because that's also a relevant topic, and maybe that could be something that we could do next time, inshallah. But for now, this is the topic. So how we would like discuss with a guy, like what they would talk about and stuff. These are some things that would come up. So over here, um, demeanor and composure, how this person is interacting with people and stuff, right? Is this a person that's very volatile? Is this a person that is just out there and just very very free and stuff? There's no boundaries and stuff, or is this a person that's extremely reserved and they'll interact with anybody and stuff? Or what is it that we're talking about here? So these are the kinds of things we're talking about when we talk about modesty and dress and manners and so on. And um, here we can also say like demeanor and composure, but we can also add in, for example, social media interactions, right? If like what kind of pictures are being posted, how comfortable is this person, like revealing like their daily life affairs and stuff like that, right? These are some things that actually also people a lot of times may not have these filters. And as we know, there's been a lot of discussion about this in the media and also in academic areas in terms of the impact of having screens that you're looking at and then being extremely revealing in terms of like everything about your life, everything about yourself and so on. I mean, how that can impact people negatively, and how cyberbullying can potentially sometimes come into this, and other things, other negative impacts and stuff. And how, for example, when like people that are trying to hire you, for example, or people that are trying to work with you, and they see your social media stuff, right? How they're going to have an impression of you and so on. So some of these things can have that impact and stuff, right? So it's not just limited to your employees, your coworkers, your colleagues, your business partners, but it can also impact your relationship in terms of your spouses and stuff like that. So just some things to keep in mind, right? Okay, yeah. So social media interactions and stuff, right? Okay. What about um, beauty and character and stuff, right? Now, beauty, I've noticed that this is that the phrase beauty. This is a quote: "Beauty is in the eye of the beholder." In other words, a person might consider something beautiful, and another person may not. Now, there are certain things that I guess might be a little bit more universal than other things, and I say more universal because I don't know if everything, like if there's anything that is completely 100% universal, but there are certain things that tend to be a little bit more common that people look for, but there are other things that they vary a lot from person to person in terms of what they're looking for, right? So again, it is something that is sort of relative to the person. Just as something to keep in mind over here. Now, a person might say beauty in the character, but we're talking about physical beauty over here. So we're going to talk about physical beauty. And the Prophet ﷺ did encourage people to, when some men would come, and there was a Sahabi, for example, he married somebody, but he hadn't seen that person. So the Prophet ﷺ told that person to go ahead and see that person, before you actually move forward and stuff like that. Because if you don't know who you're marrying and stuff, you're going to be in for a surprise, and maybe that's not something that match what you were looking for, essentially. And again, it doesn't mean that you're expecting um, unattainable perfection or whatever, like unrealistic expectations in terms of physical beauty. But there are certain things that are easier on the eye, yeah, as if you may, than other things. So those are some things that it would be a little bit more customized to that person that we're talking about here. Okay, so if you have an idea of some general characteristics and stuff that you're looking for, there are these things that are, you're firm on, but these are soft requests. So there's hard requests, as in I really need these things and stuff. And then there's also some things that, okay, I can get, if I get this main thing, then the other things are not as important. They would be nice to have, but they're not a deal breaker, essentially, right? So having that list is very important over here. So this is where I would sit down with the person and say, okay, what are the things that you really, 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 really want and stuff, right? That's it. It's you're not going to compromise in these things. Then also, what are some things that you would like to have? If you get them, great. If you don't get them, no problem, right? And then everything else would be more or less like a neutral, except I could say, for example, what are things that you would really, really do not want, right? So I can get that a little bit of that taste and stuff. So that's in terms of making sure that the pool is not too narrow, but it's also not too open and stuff. So you have a general group of people that you are considering looking within this, essentially. And this is something that you could also go both ways, but this is something that is to keep in mind over here. And then character, um, you said nice to be around, so let me actually put that like this. Okay, what's another thing that you would look at?
Just, I mean, what you could observe from them, because now that I think about it, I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't it in the Quran say that a woman, she shouldn't speak softly with non-mahram men? Like she should be stern in the way she talks, not in a way that's um like nice to them. So
Okay,
you know what I'm
I
talking
think
about?
what you're saying, and I think what you're saying is what you're trying to say, and this is again one of those things that many people do, do think about, and this is one of the concerns that does come up when you're trying to do marriage reconciliation and so on. This is one of the things that do come up, for example, how the person was whether the person was extremely free and flirtatious with another person, or would they have this demeanor and manners and stuff like that, right? So there is an ayah in the Quran referring to the wives of the Prophet ﷺ, and these are our role models and stuff. So obviously it's also giving us hints on how we need to be and stuff, right? And it is mentioning about how they need to speak in a certain way so that it doesn't impact negatively, um, or it doesn't. There are certain people who have diseases in their hearts. So Allah SWT actually mentions there are people that have diseases in their hearts, and so it doesn't negatively impact um, the believers, the mothers of the believers, um, in this particular context, where if you're speaking too softly to somebody, it can tempt people, right? And we want to make sure that there are boundaries established. If you don't have boundaries, if there are perceived removal of boundaries, or there's perceived expansions of boundaries, then that can have a negative impact. So boundaries are going to be extremely important, and you need to discuss, with you need to be on the same page when it comes to spouses on what boundaries are going to make both sides feel comfortable. So that's one of the important things over here. Most people sort of assume that the other person has the same boundaries as they do, but the reality doesn't necessarily look like that. So both sides need to sit down and discuss what they're both okay with and what they're not okay with the other person doing, right? And what they are going to themselves do to account for the boundaries or the respect, the like the I guess like the security, the perceived security in this area from the other spouse, so the other person feels safe regard to how you're acting and stuff like that. Because the idea is that you're trying to make sure that you are working together, and in a team you need to understand that you need to account for other people's, your team members' preferences and dispositions and things like that. So here you would have to definitely know boundaries here, right? Boundaries of interaction with non-mahrams, let's say, right? So what are those boundaries looking like? Is this person, again, this can also go back to manners here, so maybe that's more relevant over here. But character is something that you can work on too, right? So that's something. So I guess like character and manners would be the same, but I think you were mentioning modesty and manners in terms of like you were actually saying that a lot of people are looking more for people that are not like just like out there and like just loud and like like um, obnoxious or whatever, and I'm using these words carefully over here. But so obnoxious, like just out there and like just like in everyone's business or whatever and stuff. So there are certain things that you're just hoping for, and this is again modesty and dress and manners actually would necessarily apply to both men and women, because the ayah in Surah An-Nur, Allah Subhanahu wa Taala first talks about قُلِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ, that tell the believing men to lower their gazes, but then the next ayah after that, immediately the verse after that is let the believing women also lower their gazes and stuff, right? So Allah Subhanahu wa Taala is addressing both. So it's the idea that both sides can have this impact on the other. So in this case, it's both ways. So maybe in the next time when we talk about women looking for a husband, then that's something that you can also look at, inshallah. Because the person who is extremely like I guess for lack of a better word, a womanizer, right? Then that person in that case would also lead to issues when it comes to the marriage itself and trust and things like that, right? That the security that a person needs to have and stuff that's going to be taken away. So both modesty in this case and manners would have to be for both men and women, because both people get impacted. In how they get impacted may not be the same necessarily, but it would definitely be something that there are definitely overlaps in the how as well, but it's not like exactly the same and stuff. But what I'm trying to say over here is that manners are important and stuff to be understood, and modesty and manners is something that you would look for on both sides. Okay.
And with character, I would also like throw in like stuff like someone who's honest, and like you never hear them like saying something out of line or whatever, not just with regards to their personality. Yeah, integrity.
So yeah, there are definitely cases where like actually a lot of these cases that come up, one of the big issues is also how a person reacts to conflict, right? Or how a person acts in terms of normal interaction with the other person and stuff, right? So if a person has this thing where they're used to lying, or they're used to sort of like beating around the bush, or maybe they're used to sort of doing certain things a certain way, definitely these things can be worked on. But if a person is getting married to another person, you're getting married to that person as they are to begin with. I'm not going to go into a little bit more. I'm not going to go into more detail right now. We just went into vision. This is something that we would have to do in terms of figuring things out, and then the next thing we would have to do is to focus on where we stand currently, right? Where you stand currently, like have you been looking and things like that, whatever. Um, and again, this is not you specifically, but it is something to keep in mind that this is what I would encourage people to do. Okay, so now I want to pause over here for a little bit. Actually, like pause here for this session. Next time, I want you to see if you guys can have some consideration into where that person might be standing today, and in terms of like them. Okay, more specifically, let me just say this. In this particular context, I would also evaluate where you are today in terms of what you're going to be able to provide. So my point A here would also be like, what are some steps that you're taking towards getting towards, like looking for people that fit this criteria for you, right? But I'm also going to look at where you are in terms of what you are willing to offer right now. Okay. You can also have a vision for like how you want to get, like what you see yourself as, husband and wife moving forward, right? So, but again, that's a different aspect in terms of the end outcome of marriage, and that would be something that you would have to discuss. But in this context, when I talk about point A, I'm going to do two things. Number one, what are you doing currently to figure that out? In terms of like finding this criteria in a person. Number two, what are you offering as part of this, you know, relationship is essentially what are you bringing to the table and what are you willing to do and so on. Okay, so that's something that I want you to think about. And again, this is not necessarily about you. All the stuff that we have over here is not necessarily something that you're doing. It is a lot of the stuff that I've also seen, and you're obviously you've seen all these things and stuff that people are looking for. So inshallah, just keep that in mind. So the audience members need to know that like these are not necessarily everything that it's coming from you. It's coming from, in the sense that like it's not your preferences necessarily, or whatever. They might be, they might not be, but it is something that is encompassing a lot of the stuff that people generally tend to look for. And then these are some of the issues that, or like not having these conversations or discussing these things and not considering this to begin with when the people are looking for things, they end up getting married, and then these things end up popping up a lot. So when we do reconciliation and stuff, that these are some of the issues that do get brought up a lot. For example, how a person is interacting on social media. For example, a person might not have boundaries when it comes to interacting with non-mahrams and stuff like that, and they're just like free, like whatever and stuff like that. Everything is being talked about. Everything is being. So those are some things to keep in mind over here, because these are things that do end up negatively impacting them from like the marriage dynamics, and they can lead to divorce and things like that. But there are easy fixes for that, meaning you set up a system ahead of time to make sure that you're addressing these things, and you have discussion among yourselves, husband and wife or potential husband and wife, how they're going to make sure that they're considering these things that end up um, falling apart, essentially because we don't talk about them to begin with. A lot of people just look for like, oh, this person looks nice, they're from a good family, and let's get married and stuff like that, right? They don't actually look at the details of what we're talking about, integrity, modesty, and like these things don't really get discussed as much. Okay, so with that, I'm going to stop over here. You have your homework. Figure out, like what are some things that you would like to see in the marriage itself moving forward, and could be like children-wise, for example. This could be like education-wise and stuff. This could be like, for example, what you guys want to do together, where you want to live and stuff. Um, Obviously, you're not gonna mention that necessarily about yourself. You're just again listing down what people say or that you've come across, and then we will go into step two, which is like mapping out your current situation, and this again is what you're bringing to the table, but also what you're doing to find somebody that fits these criteria. And then third thing would be, okay, from where you are at to where you want to go, how do we break it down into pieces, inshallah? And we could do something similar to this for picking a husband. Picking a husband, inshallah. Okay. So that's my takeaway was just kind of like how, just kind of analyze over here today, how we were approaching the matter. What are some things that we were doing? How we spoke about things. How we made sure that we address certain things that might be touchy topics, controversial even, but we wanted to make sure that we addressed it if there was a need for it, and we have to talk about certain things if we need to. And in this context, especially because we're talking about, marriage, and we're talking about something that's a lifelong commitment, essentially. Okay. And then homework is again what we mentioned. So based on that, inshallah, I hope I addressed some of the things that people might have had questions about, or if they were concerned about how to start thinking about for themselves in terms of planning goals and stuff like that. I hope this kind of going through it with you guys, an example that you guys might pick, it's helping you in terms of knowing how to start vision planning and how to do current assessments and how to break things down into pieces, inshallah. And I hope that you're able to continue doing them with your own projects and goals and stuff, inshallah. So with that, سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. If you have any questions, you can reach out to us. I think it's youth@icmnc.org. Or if you want to connect with me directly, you can reach out again to that same email address and get my contact information, or you can get my contact information other places. My contact information is out there for people. And also, if there's anything that you would like to talk about, that maybe you're watching this video later on, and there's a thing that you have in mind that you want us to break down, then we can also do that, inshallah. So you can send in requests like that through the email, inshallah. And if you have any questions, you can also again connect like that.